So today we are going to be going over the odds of all the Bitaxe miners on the network hitting a block within the next X amount of days and how that actually progresses into the future. So as you can see, we've got our 4 Bitaxe miners there, obviously contributing to the solo mining. And then we have the Nerd QX, which we're also going to be adding in kind of the Nerd QX figures as well, and other miners like the Zyber 8 that you see here, and the Bitaxe Hex that you see here. Not going to be including the Avalon Nano, but we're talking about all the miners or all the Bitaxes sold on the network at current time. So let's get into the video now.
So as I said, this is going to be a quick video, which is going to be going over kind of odds of a Bitaxe miner or kind of all the open source miners put together hitting a block within however many days. So we're going over the overall kind of amount of terahash sold and kind of what's solo mining out there, and then the chances of that finding a block, and kind of how it goes in the future in terms of the terahash that needs to be on the network to viably hit blocks either weekly, monthly, or yearly. So we're just on mining pool stats. Obviously you can see all the pools at the top, so I'm going to assume that these don't have any solo miners actually pointed towards it. The main pools that have solo miners are going to be down here, so a lot of these don't even offer solo, I don't think. If you look here, via BTC does, but the rest of them only have PPLNS or some sort of shares system as you go down. So we're going to be going based off an average of kind of like the main solo pools that we've personally used in the past and that are kind of in the community that a lot of people are using. First one is probably going to be CK pool, and then if we go down, I think maybe public pool is the next one below that. Public pool is actually great because it shows the statistics of what actual miners are mining, so we can get really verifiable terahash ratings for that. But the rest of them I don't think do. So we're going to go with CK pool, public pool, parasite pool, which is a new one that has popped up and that has a lot of hash rate on it, solopool.org, and then we're going to add kind of a little bit more hash rate, maybe 1 petahash across the rest of these solo pools down here that I assume have Bitaxes pointed towards it, or Nerd QXs, Nerd miners, kind of all the open source miners that we see out there. So I'm kind of including them in there. But as you go down the list, the terahash kind of drops off as you go down. So even these ones are only at around 20 terahash. So I don't think it's going to add too much onto the calculation. So I believe that this is solomining.io, and that has 163 workers at an average of 252 terahash. So that kind of works out to be around 1.2, 1.3 terahash per worker. So I'm assuming that pretty much all of these are going to be Bitaxe miners. But that's just an assumption. As I said, this is a very rough calculation, and it kind of depends, or it needs more numbers to kind of figure out how much or how long it would take to actually mine Bitcoin with the amount of Bitaxes out there. Obviously, we've had 2 blocks previously. I don't know if the calculations actually align for those 2 blocks in terms of the odds and how much the hash rate is actually within the Bitaxe mining community. But I would say that the first block is definitely ahead of the probability, and the second block is kind of within the range after going over the calculations. So the other thing that I also want to mention is there is a lot of vendors out there that are selling them, but I'm not going to go ask every single vendor how much sales they've made. And there's also ones that aren't on this vendor list right here that also sell Bitaxe miners or Nerd QXs and stuff like that. But in the calculation, we're going to be adding up kind of the hash rate that I estimate to be, and then spreading that across how many Bitaxe gammas maybe would actually have to be on the network. Because I think currently Bitaxe gammas are the most sold things in terms of Bitaxes, way more than the Supras, way more than the Nerd QXs, and all of that. I think gamma is the most sold Bitaxe out there currently. So you have solomining.io, and that's, let's just count all of that, so 252 terahash. And then we have solopool.org. Now this has 3.08 petahash, but I don't assume that all of them are kind of on there. If you click on here, you can see the miners here. You have people that have 1.1 petahash, which is definitely not a Bitaxe miner. But all these ones that are down here, I would assume anything below 12 maybe could possibly have a Bitaxe miner. Anything that's kind of in this range as well, so the 6 terahash, these are probably going to be Nano or Avalon Nano 3S's, so anything below that I would assume is going to be Bitaxe, NerdQX, things like that you see floating around, or different variations of it. So we're going to be adding that kind of petahash up. I'll kind of give the final figures, but this is where I'm kind of getting them from overall. But I'm discounting these kind of top ones because I wouldn't assume that they're running a Bitaxe currently. So these look more like S21s or Singular, or maybe older ASICs that they've stuck together. And then public pool, as we mentioned, they do actually display what is on there, so that's good. So it does display like an ant miner, so if you have an ASIC pointed towards it. But you have a large amount of hash rate in just the Bitaxe category, which is 12.4 petahash, and then you have an extra 1 petahash coming from the NerdQX, and an extra 800 terahash coming from the NerdQX++. And then there's a bunch of other ones like this Zyber 8, we can add them on if we really want to. Bitaxe Hex, we can add those on. NerdAxe, I'm not going to add the lucky miners, but nerd miners, we can even add that on, even though it's a very small amount of hash rate. But you can see that I think public pool, or maybe CK pool, has the most amount of hash rate per Bitaxe on there. So we're definitely going to be adding probably around 13 petahash just from public pool, because they give really good figures on this. And then another big solo pool, which is CK pool, which I estimate is probably not all Bitaxe miners, or the majority of it is not Bitaxe miners, but because they have hit a block, a lot of Bitaxe miners go over to there to actually mine. As you can see, even the same kind of thing that we saw with solopool.org, you have 1.1 petahash, but on CK pool you have 31 petahash, so that's definitely not a Bitaxe miner. At least a lot of these are not going to be Bitaxe miners either, so we have to take that into account. I'm going to go with a kind of conservative figure of around 15 petahash on solo CK pool. I think it's the biggest solo pool strictly for solo mining out there currently in terms of how much hash rate you have. So you can see this here is so it's 109 petahash. There is this zsolo.bid, but that is in Lithuania. I'm not assuming that that has a lot of Bitaxe miners on it either. But we have that as well, and then we have Parasite Pool. So Parasite Pool is just a newer pool that came along that has around 7 petahash on it. I don't think it has the actual hash rate per worker, but you can see here you have the workers at 2,232. So if you divide that, that's around, let's just say 3 terahash between the workers. So I'm assuming that a lot of them are Bitaxe miners or NerdQXs, all these solo miners that you can get out there. So it did have a spike actually up to 172. So somebody must have put a massive amount of hash rate onto there, but we're going to estimate it probably at around 6 or 7 petahash in the calculation. So after doing kind of a rough estimation of the calculation, we come out with a figure of 39.59 petahash across kind of all the solo pools that we've looked at. And that is going to equate, if we do the conversion right here, so 39.59, that gives us around 39,590 terahash. As I said, we don't know how many Bitaxes have been sold. I don't think that any of them or any of the vendors on this list have actually published anything on that. But I'm assuming that based on this, it's close to either 40,000 Bitaxe gammas. I'm assuming that the gammas make up the majority of the hash rate, but also if you have a Supra or an Ultra or a Max, they're going to be around, ranging from 500 up to 800 in terms of the gigahash. So the gamma's doing probably 1.2. That's kind of how I did the calculation. My figure would put it at around 60,000 Bitaxes have been sold, but I'm pretty sure that this is just a rough estimation. It's probably looking at around 70 to 80 if we had real figures. But as I said, this is just my estimation. And it kind of works out with the calculation for how long it would actually take for all these Bitaxes to finally hit a block. So what we've done here is we just put in that terahash into a terahash calculator. We don't really care about the watts or anything like that. All we care about is what it says down here, which it says on average you'll find one block every 158 days. So that means that one Bitaxe should be hitting a block every 158 days, or around twice a year basically. And it's kind of been on par with that. So the last block was hit maybe 2 months ago, and then the one before that was hit 7 months before that one. So we're kind of maybe 4 months away from seeing another Bitaxe hit a block, but you can kind of scale this up. So we could do a calculation of 70,000, so double this. So when they start doubling in terms of the selling of this, it would take it down to 89 days, so that's around 4 a year. To get it down to 1 a week, you would have to have an immense amount of hash rate. This would probably have to be an extra 0 on the end, and that would bring it down to 9 days. So in terms of the terahash, I can't really see it on that, but let's just paste it in here. It's around 700,000, so you'd have to either sell 700,000 gammas, which is quite a lot of Bitaxe miners to actually sell. I think the main obvious thing that's happening right now in Bitaxe mining, or in just solo mining, is these higher hash rate models like the Nerd QX++ that we've seen that are due to probably hit a block very soon. There is limited supply of them, but over time I think we're going to see more and more of these higher hash rate models coming out. Obviously we see the Bitaxe Hex, but there is a trade-off because you can't produce as many as them as you can Bitaxe miners. So even on public pool, when it comes to the Nerd QXs, let's just put them together, and let's put the, I don't know if they have the original Nerd QX on here, it doesn't look like they do, but the Nerd QX altogether is 550 of these miners out there, but there's 12,000 Bitaxes. So you can kind of see that there's a very limited supply of these compared to the Bitaxe miners. But I think that these are definitely going to hit a block within the next 2 to 3 years, depending on how much development is going on and how much mass production goes on with the Nerd QX++ or just the Nerd QX models overall. But as I said, the Bitaxes are a lot cheaper, so that's why they have more hash rate, and the probability of hitting a block increases as more miners are actually sold. Now this does come into question how much the difficulty is impacted by that much terahash hitting the network, and I don't think it's impacted too much. Bitcoin's difficulty is always going to increase, and I think the sales of the Bitaxe miners are always going to increase. So it's just a question of, is the difficulty going to rise quicker than the amount of sales of Bitaxe miners out there, or just solo open source miners? That's kind of a question that I can't really answer, but I definitely think that we're seeing a progression to more of them being sold. Obviously on this channel, we are kind of indirectly promoting Bitaxe as a kind of brand in quotation marks, and that obviously helps further the information on the Bitaxe miners, so a lot more people can actually learn from it. And I know that the information is not strictly always correct on these, but the basics are there, so hopefully these videos are doing good for the solo mining community that's out there, and hopefully one of my viewers does hit a block if they buy one of these. So remember, it is a lottery, and this kind of calculation that we saw previously for 189 days, that's out of all the Bitaxes sold. So it could also be that the one Bitaxe that hit a block also hits another one. It's just pure probability and luck at that point. But you can see as we start to sell more of them, even at, let's just say, 150,000 Bitaxe miners, which I'm just going to put at 150,000 terahash, that gives it every 42 days. So if we can if we can quadruple the amount of sales in the next, I don't know, year or so, then you'll probably see a Bitaxe block hit every month or so. And I truly think it is a self-fulfilling prophecy where one Bitaxe hits a block, you see a spike in the sales of these miners, and then another Bitaxe hits a block, so there's more sales, which means that there's more hash rate, and then another one hits one, and it keeps continuing to ramp up as more and more of them hit blocks. There's going to be more sales of them for people looking out to lottery mine on the Bitcoin network. So that's just my opinion on this. If you have any thoughts, please let me know in the comments. Make sure you like the video and subscribe for more content like this.